The following production is intended for entertainment purposes only. We are not legal professionals. We do not speak for any government agency, and the opinions expressed here are our own. Relax.
And we're back. Listen, this is part 2 of episode 2, part 2 of a conversation. You can jump in here if you want, if you're all caught up, but if you're just now listening to this, it would probably make more sense for you to go to listen to part 1, but you're a grown up. You can do whatever you want. I don't really care. Yeah, we're talking about the personality types of the different branches. Obviously, gross generalizations. Everyone's, their own unique flower. But in general, this is my experience from the first from early 2000s to 2015. This is my experience. So don't beat me up if this personality isn't your personality. I'm sorry, snowflake. Yeah, have fun. So the soldier is, and my main interaction with soldiers were Army infantry, so each branch has their personality, and inside that branch, each job definitely has their personality. So like in the Navy, my traditional, my rate was an AO. I was an aviation ordnanceman before I became a Riverine. We were like I don't know how to describe this. At every award or event command wide, all the divisions would be in front of the commanding officer, and it would be all the jobs. So not just the AOs, but like everybody, every rate is in front of the commanding officer. And on an aircraft carrier, it's 5,000-6,000 people. At the end of every award ceremony like that, someone from the ordnance division yells, "If you ain't ordnance," and every ordnanceman will yell, "You ain't shit," and we'll echo across the entire place. And that has been going on since 1913, since the birth of aviation ordnance. That just happens.
Yeah.
Like that is a part. It's just like some things you can't take out of the sailor, homie.
Yeah.
So there's in every command, they know like the ordnancemen are gonna yell, "If you ain't ordnance, you ain't shit," at the end of
And
this.
so is that like an actual do they really believe that?
Yes, and it
Okay.
is true.
Okay.
at every command, well, specifically speaking for aviation type or commands that are tied to aviation, there's a personality. Like it's ordnancemen and everyone else. So like in a squadron, you'll see the shirts. You've seen it in Top Gun in the movies where the guys working on the flight deck have these different color shirts. Like some are green, most of them are green, some are white. Those are the quality assurance guys. There's yellow, and then there's red. The red are the ordnancemen. It's ordies or and everyone else. Like when we go on a training, like we used to go to El Centro a lot, or Key West, or Fallon, Nevada, to these bombing ranges and like the Top Gun school out there to load ordnance on these planes for these pilots that were learning how to fight and learning how to bomb. And whenever we descend on these towns in a much smaller number, you're talking about hundreds of people versus thousands. The ones who were the sailors, the ones who were drinking and fighting and doing all the F's, they were the ordies. And
Okay.
that was my people. But so there's branch personalities, and then there's specific job personalities. Like there's the nerds and the logistics and the and the maintenance guys, and then there's the pilots, and everybody has a personality. In the Army, well, when I was attached to Joint Commands, I spent all my time around either Army infantry, mostly Army infantry, or sometimes Army Green Berets Special Forces. And they definitely they were online with that. Like there was Army, it's kind of different, but the Army branch was not necessarily high tight personality, but definitely a flat top or a buzz. Like you'll see an Army guy with a flat top or a buzz. They'll be kind of in average shape, you know, in good shape, but there's a difference between, anyway, they'll be in good shape, and they'll be squared away. There's good, you know, just like in everything, there's good soldiers and sloppy soldiers. Most of them, especially Army infantry guys, are squared away. They're pretty smart, and they're definitely effective. We've had 20 years of practice, or not practice. We have had 20 years of, you know, legit war for them to modernize and sharpen their skills. They're all pretty good. Their personality is definitely more kind of just follow the rules. Like the classic Army NCO, non-commissioned officer, has like a 5 o'clock shadow. He's smoking a cigarette and has a cup of Joe. And he's, you know, think of like Band of Brothers. Like that's the quintessential Army infantry guy. Like,
Okay.
gee, Sarge, do we got to do this? Yep, I reckon we got to do it. Let's go do it. That's the Army. They're squared away. You know, but like I said, they have their own thing, and they're just duty. Like they're duty bound. Yeah, that's kind of it. Soldiers are soldiers, specifically infantrymen. Marines are crown eating psychopaths, but they are excellent killers. They're excellent instruments of destruction. Like if you need something, and there's a version of this, a couple of different versions of the saying, but if you need something absolutely positively destroyed, send in the US Marines, because they will do that. If it means throwing a meat wall at this objective until it gets completed, they will do that. And yeah, like if you watch Generation Kill, it's probably my favorite series on Marines. It definitely exemplifies that. That specifically was Marine Recon. Marine Recon would be like an of someone who's not special. Like you don't get to put special in your name, like Special Forces, Naval Special Warfare, which is SEALs, or Special Operations. You're not special that way, but you're definitely not a regular Marine when you're a recon. You're highly trained. Yeah, I mean I guess they're compared to Army Rangers, but Marine Recon definitely is above Army Ranger, at least in skill and
Really?
trained skill. Yeah.
Is that pretty much is that view kind of across the military? Like
Anyone
everybody
who's
kind of think?
worked with them. So
Okay.
like my buddy was a SEAL. I don't think he's in the Navy anymore, but he was a SEAL and he worked with me at Riverine Squadron 2. And so we had both worked with Army and Marines, and we were going through training at Camp Lejeune, a Marine Corps base.
Oh, bro,
And
you're probably entitled to some kind of settlement. You should put in for
dude, I
that.
got lawyers that are for real sending me paperwork. It's a weird thing. As I just got a text today, like, hey, we sent a retainer to your house. All you need to do is sign, and wanting me to get on these lawsuits. After the sheriff's office, and I'm a disabled veteran. Like I already am receiving my my veteran rights, or I don't know, rights, the things that come along with being a disabled veteran. I'm already those benefits. I'm already receiving those benefits. I don't want to join any more lawsuits,
Yeah.
especially these giant tort lawsuits where I'm going to get $350 and they're going to use millions of people and these lawyers are making millions.
Yeah.
I'm good.
Yeah.
Uh Marines are psychopaths. So what me and my buddy say is that the normal Marine infantry is basically a non-airborne Army Ranger. Like they have those same skills as far as like combat, land navigation, adaptability, because really all an Army Ranger is, and this is even I think an Army doctrine, is just a light infantry, mobile, like very mobile infantry. They're a normal infantry soldier that happens to be very very mobile. Like they can hop in a helicopter, they can jump, they can do all the special stuff. But at the end of the day, they're an infantryman. Marines are on par with an Army Ranger, except most Marine infantrymen aren't airborne because that's not a traditional Marine entry method is airborne. And a traditional Marine entry method is by a boat.
Yeah.
Like they normally storm the beaches. Marines are crown-eating psychopathic killers, but super squared away. Like we used to we used to walk on the grass on Marine bases just to get yelled at by their NCS. I say we, me and a couple, like three of my buddies used to do
That
this.
sounds very specifically Clayton.
Yeah. And be like, oh, sorry, Gunny, because we were wearing BDUs, like the normal jungle camis. It was before we got rid of them when we were in Riverines. And so we were going to Camp Lejeune, and we we were confused for Marines. And Marines do not walk on the grass like on base when they're not training. They're basically marching everywhere they go, even if they're not in formation. Their shoulders are back, their heads up, and they're all in step wherever they go. So we would purposely walk across the fields just to hear, "Hey, shit stick." Huh? And you'd see
Who,
this
me?
giant Marine beelining it straight to us. And we'd already start giggling and get that attention. And just for them to realize we're sailors and be like, "What unit are you in?" "Navy." "Get the fuck out of here and don't walk on the grass."
I mean, did they have authority over you? Like, could you get in trouble for that?
Well, technically, so by the Uniform Code of Military Justice, anybody with a rank higher than yours, you are subordinate to. But
Okay.
there's also a chain of command. Like that Marine gunnery sergeant was nowhere in my chain of command. Like I would still say yes, Gunny, and stand do what he tells me to, but he can't write me up. He can't,
Would
whatever.
that be the equivalent of like WPD supervisor? I guess the difference is they don't have any authority over you, but still, like they're
Yes.
they're not your boss.
Right, exactly. Like, yeah, like if you're a normal deputy and you roll up to a scene just to help out and a sergeant says, "Hey, I need you to do this," you're going to do what they say.
Yeah.
But they don't have any real authority over you. And Air Force, I mean, the stereotypical Air Force guy is they think they're smarter than everyone. If you ask them, they're the smartest person in the room. I've worked with a lot of folks kind of in their expeditionary like their version of expeditionary forces, so they were kind of in that lane of like fitness and shooting and stuff like that. But most Air Force folks aren't into fitness or shooting. They have no need to be.
Yeah.
And yeah, they're just nerds. They're the chair force. They're just nerds. And and that is the true and accurate description of every branch, without a doubt.
Oh, okay.
What I
So,
say is goes on that. That's actually a dogma.
okay, because I think how you started it was this is like a broad generalization,
Right.
but
Yeah.
then as you've thought about it, you're like, no, this is actual fact.
Yeah. Actually, there's no question in any of that. That's
Yeah,
100% true.
I dig it. I mean, that's usually how I pretty much anything I think about something is usually like truth. Like it's dogma.
Okay.
Yeah. Now sometimes that changes. Very occasionally, my opinion will change, but not usually. Usually takes a little while. Um, but I like to think that I'm open-minded on things. But yeah, if I believe it, then there's no other perspectives to consider.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple big evidences of you changing drastically over the last couple of years.
Yeah, there's a couple. Um,
So, I mean, you are open to change. It's possible.
is so like does Coast Guard, does that enter the conversation?
I mean, they used to. They used to be part of the Department of Defense, but now they're Department of Homeland Security. They're still, I mean, they still wear a uniform and they still serve their country, so they're obviously still the military, but they're not part of the Department of Defense. It's they almost go along with, I mean, Homeland Security. They're kind of a different version of Border Patrol.
Yeah. I mean that's their main function, right? Is
Yeah.
like interdiction, and whether drug interdiction or criminal interdiction, whatever, but via the sea.
Yeah. We went, so when I was in Riverine school, Riverine Combat Crewman School in Camp Lejeune, we were sharing the same space as Coast Guard Special Forces training, and these were these were they were actually wannabe SEALs, but I felt like the whole Coast Guard was just wannabe Navy. Like, you guys are pretending to be Navy. You're like JROTC for Navy is what it felt like. We were at a bar on base, and I'd been drinking a little bit, and I'm chatty Cathy with everyone. Like, I walk up to, especially if I'm lubed up with some, some go-go juice, I walk up to everyone. Hey, I'm Clayton. And back then, they call me Whiskey. My name's Whiskey. And what's your name? Seth or Chad or whatever stupid name. And Seth is such a stupid name. Just kidding. I remember this one guy who's whatever stupid name. I was like, "What are you doing here?" And he was like, "Oh, we're actually some type of like interdiction unit. It's actually exactly what it was. Their interdiction unit." But he said, "Oh, we're like SEALs." And at this time I had real Navy SEALs in my command, and like I PT'd with them. I was not a Navy SEAL, but I PT'd with them and did a lot of the same training for this specific command I was in. So he said, "We're actually like Navy SEALs. We're Coast Guard Navy SEALs." And I bend over, and we're at a pool table. So I bend over and slap the pool table and just start laughing right in his face. I'm like, "No, you're not." And I'm like, hey, everybody, come over here." And I look back, surprisingly, this dude is getting upset at what I'm doing.
Come
Yeah.
on, man.
Yeah, I get everyone. Everyone is actually telling me to calm down. Yeah, it turns into a little push. He pushes me and I laugh and push him back, and he's serious, I'm not. And so they separate us. But yeah, Coast Guard is wannabe sailors.
Okay. All right. Well, what
Do you want to talk about the real estate thing?
yeah. So
I suspect you're going to educate me on this. I can tell you about the locals training or local information I have, but I haven't been following it for the last couple months.
yeah, honestly, I had been for kind of a while now. I had been kind of blowing it off like I think people are making much ado about nothing, and at the end of the day it's just going to be like everything's going to stay the same. um but I don't know, here lately I kind of get the impression that maybe it'll be more significant than I think.
Yeah.
um I think though that at least from what I can tell, I think it's got the potential to really hurt buyers,
Yeah.
because now this is just my understanding of it. My understanding of it is that when you now actually let me back it up. On some level, it feels to me like when we would have case law, not even case law, we would have a prosecutor say that in order for this consent to be valid, it has to be written consent, or you have to specify, almost to the point where you're like, listen, you don't have to give consent to search. Do you understand that? And they would say
Yes.
yes. Say, really, like I'm not forcing you. And it's like, well, why? If do you want to search or not? Like, are you trying to talk them out of it? That's kind of the vibe that I get, is maybe what's supposed to happen with the new commission rules, where you do the listing agreement, and uh, it's always been, at least here, I don't know about out there, but it's always been that for as long as I've been in it. So for the past several years, I don't know
Sure.
how it's been back in the past, but anyway, if I take a listing agreement, on that agreement, it's going to say what the commission is and how you're going to split it. Do you want to cooperate with buyer's agents? Do you want to offer compensation to the buyer's agents? And that's the only way I've experienced it. So in that regard, I don't feel like anything's changed, and I feel like it's a bunch of talk, a bunch of oh, nothing, because that's what it's always been.
Yeah.
But so I think what could happen is if you really push that, like, hey, listen, the buyers are responsible for their own agent fee or their own agent commission, You can do whatever you want. Like, if you can pay me less if you want, you don't have to pay me anything if you want. Like, the more you push on that, the more likely a seller would be to say, well, yeah, if I don't have to pay their commission, that's great.
Yeah.
But I think what's going to happen, at least in my experience, is a lot of buyers don't even have funds for closing costs,
Right.
let alone an additional $4, $5, $6,000 for their agent. So it would be very likely that the buyer is going to go unrepresented,
Yeah.
or they're going to, the listing agent will be a transaction broker to them and an agent to the sellers. But they're like,
See, we're not allowed to do that here because that would be a form of dual agency.
you don't have transaction brokers?
Yeah, but I'm saying the same guy can't be. So, like, if you're representing the seller, you cannot also perform a transaction for the buyer. You specifically
Oh,
can't. Someone in
okay.
your brokerage can, but not you.
Yeah, we can. So you can do the transaction. You don't, you represent and you advocate for the seller, but you can fill out paperwork for the
Your
buyer.
fiduciary duties are to the seller.
Yeah. But the problem there is that let's say that you're a buyer and you want to buy a house that I've got listed. Yeah, I'll do the paperwork for you and I'll fill it all out. But my goal is to benefit this seller. Now, I'm not going to be, I've still got ethics and all of that kind of stuff. So it's not like I'm going to be unethical,
Right.
but I've got zero concern for your well-being. All of my focus is on getting them the best deal possible. And I just feel like buyers are going to get screwed.
Yeah.
So I don't know, I also get a sense that probably a lot of buyers are going to put in the offer that the seller is going to credit them whatever the amount is for their buyer agency. And so in that regard, nothing changes. And so I don't know, I kind of flip-flop back and forth between whether this is going to have this huge monumental change on the industry or whether it's just going to be same as usual, nothing changes. Um,
So I
I think,
got two different days uh of training, or not training. Some of it was kind of training, but of information put out about this from leadership at my new brokerage. But they both caveated it with there's going to be more information coming out later. Like, we're going to get a solid foot on this later. But for now, this is what we know about this. Because I think it doesn't even, like, the ruling doesn't take effect until July.
yeah.
So, so one day they told us, and like I said, they're still filling it out, so I'm not judging them. But one day they said, you can't take any buyer on an appointment without a buyer brokerage agreement. Like, you can't show one house without a buyer brokerage agreement now. And you're going to have to get the buyer to agree to pay your commission. And so that's going to have to be in writing. And you're going to have to call each listing. So before you even like send an offer, you're going to have the MLS might show this or the MLS might not. You're going to have to call each listing agent and ask if the seller has agreed to pay buyer commission.
Before you
And
show it.
yeah, before you show it. And you technically can still show it. And some of the people said it might even be a good idea to still show it. But you're not going to.
Well, I think you'd be obligated to.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
So it's a weird thing there that they're still navigating, that you still show it, and if they want it, you still get it for them. But
Yeah.
there's some inside, like, there's some company policy stuff that's not law stuff, so I don't want to talk about our personal company policy stuff, but they're still navigating that because, like, there's weird ideas of where money's going to come from. The next day, I was told that that's unrealistic, that might be an option of, like, having a specifically the buyer brokerage agreement. That might be an option of having them sign one before you show one house. But, like, so a lot of our leads come from Zillow, and
Yeah.
you'll just get a call on like a Friday afternoon and said, hey, I want to go look at this house at 123 Main Street. And you'll be like, okay, I'll meet you there. There's obviously more to that conversation than just that. But you meet that person there, and the idea is you show them a couple houses, and maybe by like 3, you get them to sign a BBA. You're like, hey, I can keep opening doors, but I need your permission to work for you, and B, I'm running a business, and that's the real thing. I don't want to keep wasting my time without a commitment from you.
Yeah.
But that BBA can be for a day or 5 days or whatever you want it to be until they decide to commit, and then you can sign another one. But so they said specifically like that they think that's kind of unrealistic. The BBA by the first house, it might be unrealistic. And
Now
so,
out here, that's the expectation. That's been the expectation since I've been
I was
doing
going to
it.
ask, is that how you guys do it?
Yeah. Now that's how it's supposed to be done. And that's the expectation. The reality is, I think probably a lot of people have that same scenario where, they get a sign call or whatever the case is. Maybe that might not be the best example, but they meet people out of the house, they show the house, and then some people, I think, do the buyer agreement like at the same time they write the contract.
Mm-hmm.
And the obvious problem with that is that, at least here, the neutral position or the initial position, like if you wanted to buy a house in Wichita today, I would necessarily be a transaction broker because I'm not advocating for any side. So as a transaction broker, I can't give you insight that gives you an upper hand or a benefit over the seller because I have no allegiance to either of you.
Either of
So you can imagine it'd be problematic if I'm showing a house and I don't represent either party, and you ask me, hey, what do you think about this? What do you think about the price? What do you blah blah blah? To give you that feedback would be a violation of my role as the transaction broker. So that's the expectation. I don't think that that's probably.
And so what does that conversation go like? Like whenever you show up and you're initially in the role of just a transaction broker and they start asking you, and maybe it's like at the second house, but it should be at the first.
Yeah.
How does that go?
I really try to have those. I do try to set up the meetings beforehand simply because I found that people just in general aren't loyal.
Right.
And there's different levels of that. Like maybe you've got an acquaintance that they ask you to show them some houses. They may be more loyal than a complete stranger, but at the end of the day, they're, unless they're like in your group of people that are, that know, like, and trust you, they're just more likely to kind of use whoever they can get. So I prefer to have a buyer agency agreement before I show a house, just because it at least feels like it's more secure. The reality is it isn't. The reality is that even with a buyer agency agreement, they can fire you or
That's the thing,
whatever
because there's a
at any point.
cancellation to any of these contracts.
Yeah. But even that, like, even if they didn't cancel it, this has happened before, where I was on the other end of it, it didn't end up closing, but I had somebody reach out to me that, they were like, yeah, I was working with this other agent and, they just didn't, whatever, they weren't doing their job. I didn't like them, trying to oversell me, whatever the issue was.
Right.
And then they wanted to use me as a buyer agent. In that scenario, I asked him, have you signed a cancellation with your, so you mentioned that you had, in this case, he had submitted an offer. So I was like, okay, so you must have buyer agency with this agent if you submitted an offer. And he was like, well, I did. I don't really know what I signed. So I asked if he canceled it, and he was like, I don't think I actually canceled it. I talked to my broker, and essentially, and this was a previous broker that I've got now, but essentially he told him if he gave that agent notice that their services were no longer needed, then he's done with them. He's let them know he's not working with them, and you're able to work with them now.
Yeah.
But if he hadn't given that information, you could go to any realtor in town and they're not gonna ask you probably if you've got a buyer agency. So I guess what I'm trying to say is I think that probably happens a lot, even as it is. Um, I think too, though, that my tendency, my nature is just to assume that people are making a big deal about nothing.
Yeah.
Um, and
That's what it
so,
felt like. It felt like when we were a cop and some monumental case law would come out. And at the end of the day, like, just keep doing what you're doing.
yeah, just don't be stupid. Don't do
Yeah.
anything illegal. Like it's the same, kind of like, again, asking for consent. Like you remember there was that stage where they're like, well, you've got to tell them they're free to go.
Oh, what a cliffhanger. He was just about to talk about the evolution that we went through as law enforcement officers for asking for consent to search your car. Did you know? Well, never mind. Do your own research. But yeah, that's a thing. Asking for consent. I'm not a legal professional, but contact one and maybe educate yourself on that and your Fourth Amendment rights. But guess what? When you join us next week, that's exactly where he's going to start off. And we're going to have a titillating conversation about that. As always, this week's episode was brought to you by Steadfast Real Estate Group of Heritage First Realty in Wichita, Kansas. Visit them at steadfastict.com or call at 316-461-2806. That's for all of your real estate needs in Kansas. If you have any real estate needs in North Georgia, call your boy, Clayton Blackwood. I am with Harry Norman Realty and the Hester Group. You can visit my website at ClaytonBlackwood, one word, .HarryNorman, one word, .com. That's ClaytonBlackwood.HarryNorman.com, or give me a ring at 316-409-7907. Now, if you're in Kansas and you need a tub painted, call these guys. That's my buddy Jed and his life partner Alex at 316-209-4674. That's H&L Resurfacing. They're both Marine Corps veterans. I met them in college, and they have a track record of success in this biz. All right. Yeah, join us next week. Love you guys. See you. Bye-bye.